You've been dreaming about this podcast for years. You have the idea, you bought the equipment, you got your cover art ready, you even recorded your first few episodes. You might even have a podcast interview or two in the can. And then you release it out into the world. Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Alexa, all of it. You're so excited. Your friends and family are excited for you. They're leaving reviews, they're listening, they're giving you high fives. You are pumped. Then episode 2 comes around. You're still fired up, but not quite getting the same response as the first episode. Okay. And then episode 3 comes around and you're like, man, this is a lot of work. You're not quite seeing those big downloads yet. And then you fade away. Wait. That's not going to be you. You want to know why? Because you tuned in today. You tuned in. And after coaching countless successful podcasters since 2019 and building my own top ranked show and business, I am going to take off all the veneers. I'm going to give you everything straight. I have found that there are 4 components of podcasting that most podcasters miss almost entirely. But you are smart. You're going to do this right. And I'm going to help you have a podcast that doesn't just launch and crash. Yours is going to go the distance. Now, if you know of other people who have also been dreaming of their own podcasts, or they have one, or they might keep it on ice and they fumble around, they tinker around with it, and then life gets in the way and it just never gets out there, I want you to text this episode to them right away. Now, if you know you want support to put all this into action and do it the right way, I'm offering a free clarity call with me to see if working together would be a good fit. You can schedule that at AllisonHair.com/free call. And let's talk about leveling up your brand with the best damn podcast you can possibly make. Well, let's get into it. Does everyone have a podcast? It feels like all the topics are already taken. I started looking around. I have this name. Oh, it's really inspirational. And then I see there are 12 podcasts with the same exact name. Man, are there just too many? Is it oversaturated? Well, I wanted to share some stats with you, and these stats are going to be sobering. I'm not going to lie, but there is a different way to look at this that is going to show you how much opportunity there is for you to make a mark. So podcasts, according to podcastindex.org, as of June 2025, there are 4.2 million registered podcasts out there. 4.2 million. That's a lot. And I think when I looked at YouTube, I think YouTube has like hundreds of millions of channels that are out there. But 4.2, we're talking about podcasts today. 4.2, little less than 4.2 registered podcasts. But out of those less than 4.5 million podcasts, only 450,000 of them are active, less than 500,000. And out of those active podcasts, meaning they have published a show in the past 90 days, less than 200,000, 198,000 of those podcasts published last week. So that seems like a really big disconnect. 4.2 million podcasts, but only 200,000 are publishing. So 4 million are just in the graveyard. So that can feel a little bit defeating, right? Like, I don't want my podcast to be like on the dump, right? Like on the heap of the pile. And more sobering statistics, but keep with me. This is going to show you how much opportunity there is for you to break through the noise and find your voice out here and find your people. Percent. Okay. Brace yourself. 90% of podcasts never make it past episode 3. 95% never make it past episode 8. I know that's hard, right? But I'll tell you why. I'm holding up my phone. And if you're watching me on YouTube, you'll see I have my Jersey hair. It's very wild today. But your phone, like, I could record a podcast and upload it today for free and do it all on my phone. The barrier of entry to have a podcast is so low. It's so low. So how do you keep it going? And that is the purpose of this show today, because when I started when I started podcasting and then helping other people launch their podcast. My background, I have a degree in broadcasting. I started my this podcast in 2019, and later on that year, I had put out a call to see if anybody was interested in launching their podcast because I don't know, my brain just thinks in podcasts. I have an aptitude for it. People kept asking me, and I got so many responses of people raising their hand and saying, yeah, I want a show. And so I would take this group of people through, and then I started doing this again and again and again. And what I started to realize through a lot of different formats is that I realized there was a difference. And part of the heartbreak for me of doing this work is when people would not keep going after we stopped working together. And so it consumed me really of how do you make a podcast sustainable? And even for myself too, my podcast has been through so many iterations. Do I want to publish every single week? No, I don't, and there are so many different ways to consider your podcasts. And that is really what we're going to be talking about today to make this way more manageable and define why have a podcast, right? And so when I started realizing, and at the time, I attracted a lot of hobbyists, like people that are like, I've always wanted a podcast, and my best friend and I are so funny. Everyone thinks we should have one. And then, I would work with people. And from a hobby perspective, it's fine to get it out there, but there's a very big difference for keeping it going. And so, on one hand, you want to define if you want to have a podcast, do you want to make it episodic, meaning it is just kind of ongoing, or do you want to have a podcast that operates in seasons or do a limited series? So I always advise my podcasters, all of them, the new ones especially, get to episode 12 and then decide. And that at episode 12, if you like it, keep going and it works, great. And if you don't, and this just doesn't fit, call it a day and call it a limited series and be done with it. And that's fine. I've actually done that myself. I did a 30 episode podcast called, get this, so it's very meta, The Podcaster's Journey, which was a podcast for podcasters about podcasting. So I interviewed all these incredible people. I got to 30 episodes, but I was kind of bored and I had said all I needed to say. And then I hung it up and went back to my regular podcast. And that was that. There's no shame in your game. Honestly, people get a little bit tangled with perfectionism on the podcast. I certainly have been guilty of that. But if you were to remember nothing else, your podcast is always in draft mode. You're always going to be improving. It is always going to be getting better. But what I talk about often of how do you make a podcast sustainable? At the time, I was attracting a lot of hobbyists, and a lot of times we would work together and they're like, oh my God, this is brilliant. This is amazing. I love it. I'm so happy. I'm so excited. This is it. And I'd say, okay, great. Now it's time to book your interviews. And they're like, okay, I'll get to that. And then the next week would go by. I haven't quite done it yet. My family's coming into town and I've got school coming back. And then maybe the holidays will be here. And then maybe in the new year, it'll be a better fit. Those were not the people that I wanted to work with, honestly. And that kept happening where, we would get these brilliant ideas. There wasn't enough bait on the hook, or there wasn't enough skin in the game for them to keep going. It was like just a fun thing for them to have. And so I predominantly work with personal brands and business leaders and professional leaders that are wanting to make an impact and wanting to make a difference. And so it was so heartbreaking for me. And even as somebody that was trying to start this business, I was doing this on the side. I was working full time in corporate America. But I've been doing this undercover for 6 years, and I'd been doing it on the side, but it was so hard to build testimonials when nobody had a live show. Some of those people still have shows or have very beloved shows. And one of them started in my very first program was Brian Green of The Commercial Break. And if you have not heard of The Commercial Break, it is one of the top comedy podcasts in the world and currently ranked at #1 in Apple and Spotify for comedy improv podcasts. And so it is ranked in the full podcast, but specifically in the comedy show. And he started in my very first program, and it was really fun. So let's talk about the 4 P's. Okay. So the first one is purpose. So not just the purpose of the show, but like, what is the purpose of the podcast for you? If people tell you you should have a podcast, but everything in your body is saying, no, it's going to be a ton of work. I don't want to do this. I don't then let the answer be no and be done with it. And that is perfectly fine, right? What is the purpose of the podcast? Why? Why do you want it? So I think about this in four ways. Usually there are four reasons. And most podcasts are going to, some podcasts, I should say, but I would say when you're incorporating your business, it's going to be four, and one of them is going to be primary. So I always ask, what is the primary purpose? Is it a lead generator? Is the podcast designed to generate leads for your business? Is it primarily a credibility and trust builder? Or is it a high value networking tool? A lot of times people will invite their dream clients on as guests. It's a much easier barrier of entry and a great way to build relationships with using your podcast. And the fourth one is it's a place to express yourself. So, but the primary reason is important because if your goal is to build trust and credibility, that's your primary purpose. Having a lead generating primary podcast is a totally different show. It is a completely different show, but a trust and credibility one. I'll give you an example. There's an incredible podcast. It's called Unshakable. It is about human design, and it is with Nicole Lano. Nicole Lano, I'm actually in the program. It's like an entrepreneur's human design for entrepreneurs. I love human design if you're into that. Nicole Lano has a brilliant show, and it is so good that I was in a spot where I could not get enough, and I just binge listened to it. Her show is a lead generating show. And because she was so rock solid in how she would lead people that are listening to her to get on her email list or to sign up for her free workshop or to sign up to work with her, I was so in. And it was just talking my language. She does this really, really well. That is like a lead gen forward podcast, even though it is also a trust and credibility podcast as well. But a lead generating show is always moving you back to working with you. It always has an invitation. A trust and credibility podcast, one like that is for me. Like I've got mine is a trust and credibility podcast. I'm not teaching about podcasting every single week. And in fact, most weeks I don't. And perhaps to my detriment, but I love talking about culture and I talk about using your voice. So kind of like is the secondary thing is the lead generation, that every opportunity I have an opportunity to work with me. You can go to AllisonHair.com/free call. Or if you want equipment and you're trying to figure out what your setup is going to look like, see how I've incorporated this in. But you can go to AllisonHair.com/equipment and I can take all the guesswork out for you, right? That's fine. One of my clients, the coaching equation, well, Ryan Lang and Brooke Bishop, they have a company called Empire Partners. Empire Partners only works with coaches. And so they help coaches become profitable business owners. They asked me to help them get their podcast launched. It is such a trust and credibility builder. And what they do is, and I've even heard people in their community say, I was taught about working with Empire Partners. Somebody said, hey, you need to work with them. But I did not go to their website first. I went to their podcast to see. And once I heard them, I knew that's who I wanted to work with. That is a trust and credibility building podcast. So a lead generation one, trust and credibility, high value networking tool. Again, you can get dream clients. And the fourth thing is a place to really express yourself. Sometimes when people come to me and they say, Allison, I just want to I'll ask, what is the purpose? They'll say, I just want to get my story out there. I want to inspire people with my story. And I'd say, okay, well, what's in it for them? Well, they get to be inspired. Like it needs to have a little more root. And so it's harder to build a business podcast when it is just a place to kind of throw your stuff. I call it like a mud room, like a place to throw your stuff, right? And there is a place for that too. You just have to kind of be right size your expectations around the growth of the podcast because it is going to serve potentially a smaller niche of people that kind of get what you have. But when you bring in the other components about it, then it makes sense. So the first thing is purpose. The second one is who is the person you're talking to? So you may have heard this. If the wrong answer is everybody, right? Everybody is my listener. You really want to be talking to one person. So that's why I didn't say people. I said person. Who is your ideal listener? Ideally, if you're coming here from a business perspective, the ideal listener is somebody that wants to work with you, somebody that is ready to work with you, your ideal client. That would be your primary listener. Your secondary listener is going to be somebody that really enjoys your content and they're going to share it. They're big fans, but they're passive listeners predominantly. There's nothing wrong with that. The majority of your listeners are going to be that way. And the third way may be people that are just completely out of the realm. Like I think about the podcast Girls Gotta Eat. Girls Gotta Eat is one of the biggest, funniest dating and relationship podcasts for predominantly millennials. So I am totally out of their demographic for this. I'm married. I'm not dating, in the dating and relationships, but the show is really raunchy and raucous and funny. And it is so freaking funny that I love it. Love it, love it, love it, love it. That would be an example of a tertiary. I'm probably not going to buy their dildos because they sell adult sex toys as well. They have their own line of it. And I'm probably not going to be their ideal client for that, but I sure enjoy it and I'm promoting it, right? That doesn't mean your show won't grow. So who is the person? So I would literally cut out a picture of who that person is. And if you don't know, make it up. You can have AI design it, whatever, and put it and like tape it on your monitor or next to your camera or whatever. Always talk to that person. I will give you a little bit of a sidebar. One of the ways that you can really make a massive, massive impact is using you language in your podcast. You language meaning you talk directly to your listener. You don't refer to your audience. Like I think Mel Robbins does this better than anybody out there. She does this magnificently brilliant. She never refers to her audience as her audience or people or people tell me, she'll say, "You're telling me, I'm telling you." She uses you language. And that is what draws people in because they feel like you're with them. Right. And so if you have a show, people are going to be listening to it on their phone, most likely. Right. And so that means they're going to be listening to you when they're out on a walk, or maybe they're blowing off steam because they had a fight with their partner, or maybe they're working out, or maybe they are doing dishes or putting their makeup on. You're keeping them company while they're in the bathroom, like doing their business. You're with them. Like it's such an intimate thing. So talk to them directly. It works really, really well. So that's person. The third thing is premise. What is the premise? This is what most people think about. Like, what's your show going to be about? What is your particular unique perspective that you bring to the show? What is the premise of your show? And this part is like, what's it about? And I would encourage you to sum it up like this podcast is for this kind of people solving this kind of problem. And we talk about whatever. So like for me, my podcast Reinvention Room, I've actually moved away. Again, this podcast has gone through a lot of iterations from having so many self-help gurus kind of doing a circle jerk. I'm not really interested as much anymore in the life coaching. So much life coaching content. I can only take it in doses and I will have some of it, but it's always in the framework of the lens of pop culture and culture at large and how we can support ourselves. So I never come at it and I make sure that I am not pathologizing. Or having guests on that are pathologizing you as the listener, because I don't think you're broken and I don't think anything's wrong with you. I think you've probably outgrown where you are and you need a little more space. So how do we help you kind of design what that looks like? So it is a very progressive way. But this show is helping people reinvent themselves through the lens of pop culture and culture at large, finding better ways to live life, right? So you want to figure out what is your premise? What is your unique perspective that only you can do? I will give a little sidebar on this. I would lean so hard into your quirks, into what makes you you. Do not try and chat GPT your podcast and be a watered down version of Jay Shetty, or be a watered down version of Oprah or Brene Brown or Mel Robbins or Lewis Howes. Do not do it. Be your most authentic version of yourself. Embrace your quirks. That's what people really, really love. And so I always think about this is that a few years ago, I was in a podcast conference for women, and there was a woman there, and she lived in like Virginia or something, and she was deeply, deeply obsessed. She was deeply obsessed with game shows out of the UK. And yes, I'm serious. Game shows out of the UK. She created a podcast about it. And do you think that podcast had massive success? No, probably not to your standards. But did it have a really devout, like hardcore following? It sure did, because she was talking to her people and she was talking in a language that she understood. She wasn't trying to be anybody else's replica. She was leaning into what was, what her quirks were. So I always say, like, what's your weird, and lean into it. Like for me, I love cults and I love talking about trad wives, and there are things I can talk about endlessly. DCC, I'm really into Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Maybe I'll do a whole episode on it. Who knows? But that premise and that perspective is why people tune into you. And it even, you think about Tucker Carlson, right? You may not agree with everything that he says, but you're going to listen because you want to hear his perspective. You want to hear that if it's something that you buy into or you think it's completely outrageous. So it's the same concept here. It doesn't mean that you have to be completely off the wall unless that's your personality and that's your vibe. Then yes, go for it. But people are tuning in because they want to hear your perspective. And then the fourth thing, so we talked about purpose, person, premise, or perspective. This one is critical. This one makes your job as a podcaster so much easier because this becomes your North Star. What is the promise of your show? In other words, what is the packaged takeaway that your person gets to leave with? So I think about it as like a snack, right? Like if you're walking by the pantry and you take that bag of Doritos or that snack, and that you can either eat it and consume it yourself or you can share it. That's what you want. I'll give you another way of putting this. If you have been in a sermon, right? Like you go to church and your pastor and you are so moved, you're so inspired, you're so blown away. You've never experienced a church service like this. And you are flying out. You might as well have angel wings. You're flying out of church and you see a friend at brunch and a friend says, "Wow, you look great. Where are you coming from?" I just came from church. It was so amazing. Well, what was it about? It just was so inspirational. I mean, they talked about Hebrews and they talked about Jesus. Like you just have had to been there. That is not a good sermon. That is not a good sermon. And the same goes for podcast episodes. You want people to have it packaged where they can tell a friend, they can apply it to their life. That is a great sermon. I live in Atlanta. Andy Stanley is a huge pastor of a mega church that is very, very well known worldwide. I have sat in Andy Stanley's sermons and I am completely moved to tears. And there are lessons that I've learned from him from 15 years ago that I have never forgotten. And I heard him talk about on another podcast about how he shapes his messages. And he said, I know that if people remember them, the only way they remember them is if they are portable, meaning I need to package them in a way that it's memorable. It's one thing to be very esoteric and talk about things that are inspiring and make you feel good. But he spends all this time like making things rhyme or having some kind of framework or having something there. So that part is really important. So when I give you these examples as an idea, like we talked about the commercial break, right? Brian Green and his partner, Chrissy, who is his co host on this hilarious show. Their promise is that you will laugh at least once. You will laugh out loud at least once, but not like, that was funny. You will literally spit soda out your nose. It's so damn funny. At least once an episode. That's his promise, right? The Coaching Equation, Ryan and Brooks podcast. Every single episode, they deliver a framework. They deliver an equation. The equation is right in the title of the show, The Coaching Equation for coaches. So they are always delivering that. Diary of a CEO is a great example that they always leave. You will always leave with a conversation starter. Like it's going to stir something up. So maybe for you, it looks like a practical takeaway. Maybe for you, it looks like something that they can leave, but you want them to share the show. So the promise is what helps do that. So those are the 4 P's: purpose, person, premise, or perspective, or promise. And honestly, knowing about the 4 P's is great. but action is everything. Action is everything. So what are you going to do with this? How are you going to put this into practice? Most people, when they think of podcasting or starting a podcast, they are just focused on, let me just get that first episode out there. And then it's out there and they're like, well, let me just let the podcast gods do their magic and hopefully it'll just take off. That's where people struggle. That's why there are so many in the podcast graveyard. But when you have a strategic, intentional, focused, thoughtful approach to your podcast beyond just the strategy of like, here's who's going to edit it, here's when I'm going to record, all of those initiatives and those are fine. And again, there are systems and technology that make it so freaking easy now to publish and to have a decently sounding good show. And again, you can go to AllisonHair.com/equipment. That'll give you a quick start guide and an equipment. So you can just click and go. So you don't have to go through crazy rabbit holes trying to compare and get frozen from that. Those are fine, but you want your show to make an impact. You want it to grow your influence and to grow your income. And so working with me, or at least in this practice, it may be a little bit unconventional, but I'm going to slow you down enough to get clarity so you can take off like a rocket, because that way you've got the infrastructure built where you can keep going and you can have the show of your dreams and make it the best damn show out there. I want you to have a podcast that matter, and I want you to build lasting authority and consistently attract the right listeners. But that doesn't happen by accident. They happen through intentional clarity and strategy. So, as you know, I've helped podcasters turn vague ideas into profitable, influential platforms, and I would love to do the same for you. And if you really don't feel like muscling this through on your own or want to get a second opinion on some of the ideas to have the best damn show out there, let's talk about working together. You can book a free clarity call at AllisonHair.com/free call. And while we're out there taking action and stuff and doing things, won't you go write a review for the show for your podcast on your favorite podcast player? That feedback helps me make a better show for you and help people like you find me so we can grow our community even stronger. Well, thanks for listening. And remember, your audience is out there. Talk to them.